Hello and welcome to another episode of Business and Bubble Tea. Here on the podcast today, we have with us Jonathan Cox, the CEO of Real Life China. Jonathan, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, it's great to be here. Great to talk to you guys.
Welcome, Jonathan. So you are currently based in Australia. You studied in the US. Where does China come into play? Where does your interest in China start?
Well, it started at a very young age. My parents moved to Hong Kong when I was 5 years old, and I grew up from 5 years old to 15 in Hong Kong, Macau, and Southeast Asia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, etc. And I guess that's where I got my taste and experience and love for Asia.
The bug, that's where it kicked in, eh?
That's where the bug kicked in. And then when
Yeah,
I
what
was
about
in my early 20s and going to university, I wanted to do something different, not just get a degree, but do something with a little bit of a flair, I guess. And because I'd grown
Yeah.
up in Asia and been around China, I just knew the potential for China. So I got a one-way ticket back to Hong Kong in my early 20s and ended up studying at Qingdao University, Mandarin, knowing that that's the real
Amazing.
ticket for getting into markets.
Amazing. And so when did this adventure start, I guess, professionally speaking? So now you're the CEO at Real Life Group. And where did that journey start? Where did it begin? And I guess what's the aim?
Yeah, I guess it started really in earnest when I went, back to China in 1998 and studied Mandarin. Definitely at that time, I had a mood board and a vision board that I'd written up about learning Chinese, and for the
Yeah.
purpose of selling products and services in the health and wellness categories to this huge China market,
Yep.
which at that time was really just emerging. So I studied for 2 years, and then I went
Yep.
back to Florida, where I was based at the time. And I got a job with a company called Tupperware. I was looking specifically for a company that had operations in China. That was my criteria. I
Yep.
basically said, I'll take any job as long as they're global and have operations in China, which they did. And
Amazing.
kind of my dream came true in a way. I worked with them at the home headquarters in Florida for 2 years, and then got posted to China for about an 8-year stint with Tupperware when they were first opening up the market, setting up
Yep.
distribution. And that's where I really, I guess, cut
Which
my teeth and broke the ice as far as the business side of things. And that was
Yep.
2002.
which changes do you see from like when you started with Tupperware until now in the Chinese landscape in terms of sales and um, let's say also digital changes on how to sell products in Chinese
Yeah,
market?
you've nailed it. I mean, it's one word. It's digital. I think culturally, China is actually very much the same in a lot of ways. And even from a regulatory perspective, it's very much the same. It's still very challenging, if not more so. Um, but the digital revolution is the huge change, and you have to be completely on board with that. And that in itself is an anomaly with China, where you have over 50% of commerce happening on the internet, and it's unlike any market in the world. So that I would say
And
is
and more
probably the biggest change.
and more specifically, what problem does Rue Life solve, and what makes it unique, and in terms of the challenges it overcomes?
Yeah, so I guess that a key part of our IP is our experience over the last, and my personal experience as well, in launching brands into China for more than 20 years. And a
Mm.
lot of knowing what not to do is probably part of that. So it would be experience. But essentially, what we do is we are experts in initial launch phase into China. So how you set things up from a regulatory, your business structure, your digital e-commerce, your digital footprint in the
Mm.
market. So we specialize in bringing brands, I guess, from 0 to 1. over, and that usually
Yeah.
takes between 1 to 3 years to really get set up. And our key differentiator, I guess you would call it, is our transparency, because we've done this a lot over the years, and I've been on both sides, the brand side, and also the distributor side. I guess we understand the problems and the risks and what they need to see. So we go into this as much as you can, because China is very opaque and difficult to understand and complex and constantly changing, etc. But we
Hmm.
try to take brands by the hand and give them a lot of transparency on what can go wrong, what the challenges are, and lay out a very clear plan for entry. So in one word, our point of differentiation is transparency.
And I'm really curious about, you mentioned what not to do. Do you have one example of this, or something that the company should be careful about when entering this market?
There's a great book which I've read many times by Jonathan Spence, and it's called To Change China. I don't know if you've read it, but it was actually
Not
written
yet.
in 1986, and it's each chapter is a story of someone from the Western world who came to China over the last 150 years, and it's a little bit of a play on words, to change China, because ultimately China will change you, and not the other way around.
Mm.
And so I think the key thing and mistakes people make is coming into China with their own agenda, or how they've done it in the Western world, and not being open enough. But China will change you, and the regulations in China also will have a big impact on your business model and how you can set yourself up. I guess an old but specific example would be Tupperware, which is
Yeah.
globally a direct selling company. Um, and they set it up with that model in 1996 originally, and it took them 6 years due to Chinese regulation, which started to ban direct selling companies. So they were
Hmm.
forced to completely change their business model, and it's unique to any other of the 40 markets they are in around the world. They changed it to a distributor or franchise model, but that change took the company probably 3 years, because they were a direct selling company,
Yep.
and to accept a completely different structure and business model was hard. And once they finally did, that's
Yep.
when they really started to get traction and success.
And I'm just wondering, like, it sounds a bit like, almost like you're the NASA launch station for brands in China. And I'm just wondering, have you noticed are there any case studies you could talk about recently that you've observed within the FMCG space yourselves?
Well, I guess a product that we're very excited about at the moment and is gaining traction in China, even in a very contrary business environment that we've had in the last couple of years with COVID, etc., is a brand which we represent exclusively in China called Remedy Drinks. Remedy Drinks is kombucha. It was a company that was started in 2012 and have expanded rapidly globally,
Mm.
and has their own manufacturing plant in Melbourne, and it's part of that health and wellness craze. Kombucha is
Yep.
actually originally a Chinese concept, kombucha, so healthy fermented tea,
Ah,
right?
okay.
And it's now coming
Yep.
full circle and being launched as a yuppie product in China, added with carbonation and flavors and things like that. But it's
Yep.
originally an ancient Chinese concept, and now it's coming back into the
Amazing.
market as a new concept to the Chinese, and it's a fascinating thing to do. So um, that brand, I mean, it starts with the fact that the stars have to align for things to be successful in China, I believe, and that starts all the way up the value chain. In this case, the company has their own, one of the most modern and new beverage manufacturing, carbonated beverage manufacturing plants in Australia, probably the
Mm.
newest and the largest. So they're very strong in their manufacturing. That helps them to keep their cost of goods down. Their supply chain is strong. They're very aggressive in their marketing and penetration in the
Mm.
Australian and New Zealand market, their home market, with over
Yep.
60% market share. all of these things. We haven't even talked about getting into China yet, but the brand being established, highly proven, is part of what builds the foundation for success for a launch into China. Then when you start looking at China, they have some very strong backing in terms of investment from some very large food groups. And they had the mandate to enter some specific markets globally. So that's the UK, the US, and China were on their strategic horizon. So there you have support at even above the CEO and board level at the investor level, which is also
Amazing.
very important for a China launch. It's not just an international trade manager decision. If you can get support and investment all the way up the value chain. So we brought them into China. Also, their approach was very, very good and very important. The first thing they wanted to look at with us, and we discussed this and started a service for them, was looking at their trademark and the regulatory environment for their products, because there's actually no category for the product. It's a fermented sparkling beverage that actually fell into beer category from a customs and even cross-border e-commerce regulatory perspective. Okay, it ticks 2 boxes and it's close enough to beer. So we actually had to argue with the tax authorities on the first import. They taxed us as a beer for the first 3 months. But we just had to
to
get the product in. So we started from a it sounds a bit dry, no pun intended, with a beverage, but it started with that, the regulatory business environment, and then looking at the structure of how we do it. So we're their exclusive distributor. We went first into cross-border e-commerce on Tmall Global and also on Little Red Book, Xiaohongshu, just to build out their digital footprint initially, and then started working with a very large distributor on general trade import called Jepson or 31 Geo in Shanghai. A lot of credit to those guys. They're the huge beverage distributor, but even more specifically, they are the #1 importers of non-alcoholic Australian beverage, a product called Bundaberg, which has been in the market for about 18 years with very established channels. And they saw Remedy coming in as very strategic in the non-alcoholic beverage choice. It kind of looks like a beer, the bottle, and it's a great alternative. It's no sugar. So it's sold very much as a healthy, functional beverage. That's another interesting point, is that in Australia, one of the key parts of the positioning is organic. Okay, being an organic, Byron
Same
Bay.
in the UK,
almost cool, hippie, yuppie type positioning. Whereas in China, we had to actually take off the organic and we had to take off the no sugar claim. These are both regulatory issues, which I won't get into. But it's positioned very much as a functional beverage. So the health benefits of the no cane sugar, at least. And it's good for the gut, so kind of prebiotic. And also very low calories. So an alternative for the health and wellness crowd. So we started with, besides the online activity, we started getting the product featured a lot of times for free, quite honestly. It's a trade secret, but getting it into gyms and high-end cool restaurants and bars, which was not so much in the beginning a sales strategy, but it was a positioning strategy. And then we could use that material both online and offline. So we got into Will's Gyms, for example, sponsored a lot of their events, which is the #1, you could say, arguably the #1 health and wellness gym. Very important strategically to then talk about that to other sales channels, etc. And we're highly penetrated in Shanghai as well as Guangzhou at the moment, and then got it into Hema and Olay also. So we're 22 months into the journey, but it's extremely exciting. And I was there. I did a lot of this remotely during COVID. So just recently back in China.
That's incredible.
To see it on shelf, like to pick it off the shelf in Hema, and to go to cool places in Shanghai and order it off the menu. It was blowing my own mind, and we were the ones
Yeah.
doing it along with our distributors
It's
in
here,
China.
there, we did it.
Yeah, it was blowing
Amazing.
my
And
mind. It was so exciting.
and is Jefferson like is that a Chinese like owned strategic partner? You mentioned Xiaohongshu and Tmall as kind of
Yes,
your digital footprint access. Um,
yes.
so is that a Chinese distributor partner that you had to go and find on behalf of them, or how did that work?
Yeah, it was a real cooperation with the brand. In China, or anywhere in the world, but particularly in China, to execute in the China market really takes a village, and it takes a lot of close partnerships and relationships. There's never
Yeah.
a single business entity in China that can do everything. You've got to work with a lot of different agencies and distributors, but interestingly enough, well, it's a bit of a long story, but we started off with a company called 31 Jill that was already talking directly to the brand, and we knew of 31 Jill ourselves, but they actually brought us together. So we had a three-way meeting and talked about it with the brand. So that's another thing about China entry. You've really got to be working in partnership with a brand. And then, based on some of our efforts, even though we had direct contacts with Hema, Hema saw the activity, okay, and even saw the activity on Alibaba, and they contacted the brand directly, wanting to bypass us as distributors, which is possible, may
Wow.
happen
Okay.
in the future.
Yeah.
But the brand,
Yeah.
again, got us all together, and we already had the product in market, so it's best to go through us. And so it's 31 Geo and Jepson that's supplying him. Anyways,
Yep.
long story short, Jepson bought out 31 Geo during this time. I told you China's complex. But Jepson
Yep.
is a fascinating company in itself. It's a 150-year-old company started by some Danish guys 150 years ago, and has been continually run as a private company by Danish heirs up until now. And it's a massive company. They're also the exclusive perpetual distributors for Porsche.
Oh
Okay,
wow. Okay.
let that sink in. Let that sink in. Perpetual exclusive distributors for Porsche into China is just one of the many things they have in their
Amazing.
portfolio, because they signed some agreement, 50, 60 years ago when China was nothing.
Jesus.
And now it's
Yeah.
something, don't quote me on this, but it's something like 50% of Porsche sales, something ridiculous. And they're the
Okay.
exclusive perpetual distributor. So maybe that's a lesson. Be careful what you sign. But good for Jepson, and they're an
Yeah.
incredible
Yeah.
organization that we learn a lot from as well.
And looking at your marketing strategy, I was thinking about KOL, which is a concept that is different from the West. Did you have any
Yes,
experience with collaboration with KOLs? How was it? Can you tell us a little bit more?
absolutely. The there's several descriptors for KOLs. There's and different levels, right? So there's celebrity endorsers or ambassadors is probably at the very top
Mm-hmm.
level. Although that's probably challenged by some of the top live streamers for direct sales campaign. And then there below that there's KOLs. I would say is that next level, and also what we call user generated content is probably a level below that. But when you get into the user generated content, um, there's literally hundreds of thousands of potential KOLs. For example, for us with the Will's Gym, for example, the trainers are mini KOLs in their own right in their gym, and they usually have a following of gym members. So we utilize all levels in our marketing campaign. It also depends on where the brand is at on investment. So you can also do a brand at a very low entry level with KOLs that's helping you with your digital footprint and your brand positioning. And so there are many different ways to go about it, and also the landscape is changing rapidly, and also KOLs, they come and they go in their popularity. So
Yep.
yeah, it's a great question. Definitely, we use KOLs and influencers constantly in what we do, but it's an ever-changing landscape.
Amazing. We've got time for one final question, and I just wanted to ask, what should we be watching out for in the future, I guess, with what you're seeing from your side with trends in FMCG in China?
So I've got a lot of thoughts on this question. Let me start let me start way back, going back into Chinese history. So I'm and I'm going to get to specifically answering your question. But as far as importing food into China, China has had to import food for over 500 years. And they will continue to import food and FMCG for my children and my children's children's lifetime. Okay, so there's a long-term vision here for importing both food as a wholesale commodity, as well as finished goods and wines and consumer products. So I'm very bullish on it conceptually and historically from a long-term view. However, I think your question is more about like what's happening now and how are things changing today. And it's going to be stuff that you already know, but it is very relevant and true. The rise of Chinese brands, and just being in China, having their manufacturing in China, they're able to shorten the supply chain so much. So just by that alone, they've probably got 3 to 6 months on a lot of Western brands in FMCG, right? They're just so much faster in delivering the actual physical products to China. Also, the government is sponsoring, if you will, and favorable to the local brands as well. So brands, how does that impact foreign brands? Obviously, the competition is tougher, but a lot of brands need to consider, if they've got a great brand, consider even manufacturing in China to compete with that on a supply chain basis alone. 3 cases, when I look at brands, I'm based in Australia, so I look at a lot of Australian brands, but if you look at big Australian brands that were bought out by Chinese companies, so Swiss, for example, the #1 nutritional brand out of Australia, Trilogy, a skincare brand out of New Zealand, and NutriCare, another nutritional product. Those are 3 that were purchased by Chinese companies. One of the very first things they did in every single one of those cases was begin local manufacturing, which prior to being a Western-owned company, they were very reluctant to do something like that. But you can already see, for example, Swiss nutritional products, which wouldn't make it in being produced in Australia from a regulatory perspective, are being produced in Guangdong. So I guess in a word, to answer your question, localization is probably the biggest trend that I've seen, and that people need to be ready for. I could tell you 10 others, but I would say if you're going to look at one and need to consider one, if you're FMCG, look at localization of your brand and local competition.
Amazing. Well, Jonathan, that's all we've got time for today, but thank you so much for joining us on Business and Bubble Tea. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Nice to meet you both.
Thank you so much.